We ran as fast as we possibly could, three of us darting across the dangerous sands, dodging the nipping teeth of the sandworms as the horrendous roar of a Praetorian echoed across the valley. I glanced behind me, seeing the skittering roach creatures getting dragged into the sand by the worms under our feet. We moved too fast for the worms to respond, but our trotting alerted them. The bugs never stood a chance as part of the swarm was torn to pieces behind us. Although I could feel the wriggling under my own feet, I made it to the rocks. I climbed on the rock and then into the door of the out-service building. I was quickly dragged into it by Terry, the human mechanic. "Where is Rockar?" I asked between gasps of breath. The sound of Iscarian curse words and laser fire came from upstairs. "Ah," I said as the sound of squealing bugs filled the outside. "He can hold them off, but he doesn't have anything that can handle a Praetorian. We need more firepower. The generator is still online and has plenty of fuel." "So we have that at least," he said as he hastily climbed over and into the boxes and crates stored in the building. "What are you looking for?" "I think Raykar's pulse rifle is basically the only weapon we have, and he smuggled it in," I said, watching him climb about the crates like a beast. "I'm looking for anything that can be helpful, including spare parts for the generator so Raykar can recharge his pulse rifle's power cells. I'm looking for food, medical supplies, and even a pipe wrench at this point." "Speaking of the devil," he said as he reached into a box and tossed a hefty two-handed wrench at me. I caught it. "Oh, a pipe wrench?" I thought for a moment as he scrambled about a bit longer. "Oh, it has a decent heft, actually. Can use this to crack the roaches that escape the worms." "That's the idea," he said as Raykar continued to unleash a slurry of hastily gasped curse words at the horde. I opened the door and quickly spotted a scurrying roach. It didn't get away. I brought the hefty tool down on its carapace, the splatter of green blood and cracked chitin over the rock. I kicked its corpse away and watched it get torn to pieces by the worms, who were now in a frenzied state thanks to the sudden food supply. The Praetorian was tearing the inside of the observatory offices to pieces in a rage as its swarmlings were devoured by the sandworms. Terry had long since retracted the service ramp, denying it access to us, and I could see its beady eyes glaring at me from a window. I smiled, staring at it as I wrapped the tip of my tail around the handle of my new weapon. Still staring at it, I slammed the tool down on the body of a roach that got through the worms. It screamed at me, its rage at my act of defiance making it charge the window. Raykar's racial slurs got more intense as he emptied an entire charge of laser fire against the beast. The fire doing nothing, of course, the lasers dissipating on its chitin or missing shots, but it was enough to make it resume tearing the building apart. This bought us time. "I'm doing a perimeter check," I yelled out above the laser fire. "I will cover. These blasted creatures shall know pain," Raykar exclaimed in response as he kept the assault on the swarmlings. He was taking out the ones that escaped the worms. I wandered around the fence line and checked. A few roaches had gotten through, but most were injured thanks to the worms. A smack here and a thwack there. I got rid of them all and kicked their corpses into the sand. The sand itself was absolutely insane, writhing and moving. The entire sand dune around us was moving, alive. The sheer number of worms now traveling to enjoy the swarm of bugs giving them a free meal was truly staggering. It looked as if the ground itself was a corpse infested with maggots, wrinkling with the numbers. Both us and the Praetorian were now trapped on this peninsula, the small, rocky outcrop above the sands that were our temporary home. "Worms! Everywhere!" I yelled up at the tower. "I know," Raykar yelled back. "Now these creatures are trapped here with me." He laughed, blasting 3 roaches in quick succession. I checked the generator and cables. Everything was fine. They didn't manage to get past the worms long enough to chew on any cables or do any damage. 1 or 2 managed to get on the rocks, but died owing to the fact they had been half-eaten. I kicked them into the writhing mass of worms and let the beasts eat. I finished my perimeter check and entered the building to find Terry and Logan messing around with a railgun. "Is that the spare cannon for the perimeter defense network?" I asked. "Yes," they both replied. Logan's claws hoisted the device up onto a hastily assembled trolley mechanism. Terry had used the spare parts for the astronomy tower's rotation and axis mechanisms to create a makeshift turret. Terry was quickly and hastily assembling whatever mechanism he was working on, using loose bolts, screws, and clamps. Gonna have to find something to use as ammo. Only have canister shells here, so I need to improvise, Terry said between grunts as he tightened a bolt. Is this going to work? I asked and swung my body to the right to slam my wrench on a half-eaten roach that was climbing up the wall. I have no idea. Probably will blow the generator. I managed to get an emergency signal, and I know a fleet is on the way for response. But it will be 2 days. 2 damn days. The Praetorian isn't dumb enough to get eaten by worms, and the worms will only be so hungry no matter how many of them there are, Terry said as Logan used his bulk to force a piece of metal into place for Terry to bolt down. Is the connection to the main reactor gone? That why the perimeter defenses are out? I asked. Vicious devils destroyed the primary conveyance from the place of energy before they attacked the Tower of Seeing. Easily repaired, but not while that vicious beast and his minions haunt our domain, Logan poetically stated. Okay, so here's the idea. You two use the railgun to blow the Praetorian's face off. Terry grunted as he started connecting lines of power cables to the machine's makeshift capacitors. With what ammunition? I asked. I can't use any spare parts. I don't know what the damage is to the lab or the comms relay, so I can't risk using anything I might miss. He used a hammer and smashed a seal on a cable joint to secure it. Any ideas? The only thing besides the parts in the warehouse are used tea bags that I've been dumping on the rock face nearby. Or perhaps I can acquire a few roaches and use their shells for ammo, I sarcastically said. Tea bags? That works. Stuff them in this canister shell. As many as you can. Wet, dry, don't care, Terry commanded as he presented a hollow tube. You cannot be serious. If I hit the Praetorian even at full power with an empty canister shell, it isn't going to do anything. It would be like shooting a freight train with a BB gun. If I can give the canister shell some actual mass to fire, I can reduce the power output we need for a kill shot, and I won't have to replace the generator, Terry said. I shook my head and grabbed the canister. This is insanity. I shook my head and smashed a half-eaten roach on my way out the door. I knew this wouldn't work, but I did as asked anyway. Wasn't as if the director could say no, considering he was the first to get got by the swarm. I headed out using my wrench to beat a roach that escaped the jaws of hell. I found what I was looking for, a pile of refuse I had been using for some time to disguise my tea-drinking habit in the form of a large number of discarded tea bags. I grabbed handfuls of slightly soggy, sun-baked tea bags, gagging as I stuffed them into the canister. This is never going to work, I said, gagging in disgust at the sight of a metal cylinder stuffed with weeks-old tea bags. I walked back to the tower and smashed a roach on the way. This one was slightly less eaten than the other ones. The worms weren't as hungry anymore. We were running out of time. I grabbed an old roach corpse and the corpse of the one I just squashed and walked inside, canister under my arm. Hey, boys, guess the worms are getting properly fed. I held up the two corpses to show the difference between now and a half hour ago. We're out of time. Help me drag this thing upstairs, Terry commanded. This is never going to work, I said, handing Terry the shell. Do you have any better ideas? He bellowed at me. I raised my hands, scoffing and shaking my head as I went back outside to squash more roaches. I walked to the edge of the rock, and with the wrench in my tail, I stood by and watched the swarm get eaten. The stench was something quite awful. Bug corpses and blood mixed with the telltale stench of worm excrement and festering gore from the feeding frenzy. I looked over the damage. Most of the superstructure was still intact. Every now and then a roach would crawl up from the jaws of a worm, and I would fling my tail and squash it. After one such event of wandering around bashing the occasional roach, I noticed the Praetorian was glaring at me. I stood in its view and taunted it. It didn't respond to anything I did. I waved my hands at it, tilted my head. It just glared at me until I smacked a roach. It aggressively charged the windows, breaking them, swinging its claws at me. Ooh, poor big bad boy doesn't like it when I do this, I yelled, taunting him by ripping Roach's legs off. It roared angrily and started throwing chairs out the window. The roach in my hand wriggled and squealed. I sarcastically threw it into the waiting jaws as it screeched while being torn apart. Oopsie daisy! My hand slipped, I said, then smiled while flipping it off. It aggressively growled at me and tried to claw its way at me. The worms, on the other hand, saw it trying to do that, and they all buzzed angrily like a swarm of hungry bees. Heads popped out of the sand and mouths splayed open like carnivorous flowers. It backed off. Even a Praetorian wouldn't survive more than a few seconds with a worm colony of this size. Praetorians weren't stupid, just aggressive. Roaches, on the other hand, they were. I could see inside the dome through the now shattered glass. The hatchery was working hard. The bloated mass of parasitic flesh that was once Director Krennic was pumping out hundreds of eggs, making itself a nice space for the Praetorian to lay its eggs. I noticed that a bunch of worms had been grabbed and were being fed to the mass of globby flesh. Well, that explained why the worms were so aggravated. Not only were they in a feeding frenzy, they were annoyed they were being used for food, too. Part of the great chain, I suppose. I laughed as another wave of freshly born roaches was sent towards us, only for most to be gobbled up by the worms. It was a rare and frankly satisfying sight to see these monsters being eaten for once. I grabbed a roach and disabled its mandibles with one swift punch, knocking it out before ripping its mouth-chewy parts out of its head. The creature squirmed and shrieked. The Praetorian got very angry at me. I feigned care and teasingly stroked the creature's head, then ripped out all of its legs one by one as I glared at the Praetorian. I smiled, spat on the roach, and gleefully mocked the Praetorian's angered glare as I slowly fed the roach to a worm, the fetid beast screeching as it was consumed, desperately trying to wriggle out of its doom. The Praetorian definitely didn't like that, and it started lunging at me, digging its claws into the building and hanging out the window to try to claw at me. It was mostly just for intimidation, and it failed. I stuck my tongue out at it. Then I heard a loud boom noise and the beast's head was gone. I squealed in shock as its head was blown clean off its carapace, disintegrating against the rock. It sort of hung there for a few seconds before falling down from the window and crashing into the ground below where the worms eagerly grabbed it and dragged it into the sands. The sounds of growling and gnawing from under the sand filled the air. Terry quickly rushed over to where I was carrying something. "Sorry, Director. I found your booze stash," he said, and with an all-too-satisfied smirk, started throwing flaming bottles into the window, coating the ground, and what was left of the poor director in fuel and flame. The observatory caught fire, at least the top part of it. We wouldn't be able to get any work done, but at least it was over. I think. Terry sat next to me as we watched the pile burn, the smell and sound of the popping and crackling eggs. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and I sat on the rock, curled into a ball as I watched. Terry timed it and made it so the fire extinguishers were off and wouldn't douse the flame until we were sure the nest was gone. He then restarted the generator, setting off the fire alarm and dousing the fire thanks to the sprinklers. With a triumphant roar of sadistic glee, Raykar and Logan charged across the hastily extended gangplank over the ocean of hungry worms and started destroying what the fire didn't. "Unto the breach, dear friends, once more," Logan bellowed excitedly as he carried a large pipe into the building, following noises of heavy clanging. Terry sat next to me, catching his breath as the other two cleaned up the building. "That was a damn good shot." "How did you know that would work?" I asked. "I didn't, but it was better than nothing. The shell needed mass. I had no idea it was going to act like a shotgun shell. First time I've ever killed a bug with a teabag, though." "That's one for the history books," he said with a chuckle. "Technically, you killed it with a railgun, but close enough, I guess." "What do we do now?" I asked. "Signal is still active. We're going to wait for the worms to calm down, then I'm going to fix the power relay. Our food and drink supplies are still good. Just need those two to finish their glorious bug-squashing crusade. Then we can hide out in the outbuilding until reinforcements get here. After that, it's up to the Corps to sweep and clear and install the bug zappers," he calmly said and flopped back on the rock. "Have it thee, foul cur!" came a voice from inside, followed by a loud, hollow clang and a series of creative bug-adjacent racial slurs. To be honest, I wasn't expecting the damn thing to explode in my face. Never jury-rigged a railgun before. Skimmed through a Galatube vid once. Not my forte, to be honest, but glad it worked, I guess. Kind of the reason I took the shot and made the guys work the plank and defend the tower. Anything was going to happen, was going to be me it happened to, he said. You mean you had no idea how to actually do that? But you somehow managed to do it anyway? And you knew if it went wrong. If it went wrong, I trailed off, no longer wanting to talk. Anyway, I'm going to check the comms network and make sure the guys are okay. He brandished a crowbar and stood up. You going to be okay here? He asked. I responded by flinging my tail-mounted wrench onto the half-eaten body of a roach that escaped the worms, nodded quietly, and let him do his thing. He wandered off with a casual whistle and left me sitting there on the rock. He watched a video on the extranet and used the information he saw to make a makeshift capacitor for a railgun and armed that railgun with tea bags and killed a Praetorian. A Praetorian? Are all human mechanics this scary? What kind of things are actually on Galatube the Council doesn't know about? He killed one of the worst enemies in the galaxy with a tea bag loaded in the equivalent of an electric slingshot. After thinking about it for a while, is it normal to be more scared of humans than the bugs?